Wealth, Sizwe Nxedlana from FNB, and we're talking about the 50 basis point hike announced by the Reserve Bank Governor today. No big surprise. We were talking just before the break at the potential for this to protect our rand, which seems to be on the spiral downward, and I guess the rand not being specifically targeted, but is this in the back of the mind of the Reserve Bank Governor, Sizwe?
I think absolutely, and I think the point of departure is obviously the key vulnerability for South Africa. I think the underlying cause of most of our problems is that we've been living beyond our means for an extended period of time. That's manifest in a very large current account deficit, which needs to be funded by the kindness of strangers. In other words, FDI or portfolio flows. And now those portfolio flows are actually starting to reverse because what was pushing them here, lower interest rates, zero interest rates, in fact, in the US and QE in the US is no longer there. So this Goldilocks period of high commodity prices and very low interest rates overseas that was funding our over expenditure has changed. So we must now readjust to a situation where commodity prices are lower. In other words, our exports are also lower, and which means that we have to tighten the belt. So our expenditure must now readjust to our lower income reality as a country. Now, for that to happen, you need government to tighten the belt. That suggests very stringent fiscal policy, austere fiscal policy, possibly even tax hikes. It also means that interest rates must go up. And the implication of that is that not only do they re-attract the capital inflows, but they also protect excessive exchange rate depreciation and by implication then fight against higher inflation.
Talking about tightening our belts, the previous Reserve Bank Governor, Jill Marcus, kept on warning against wage increases. She spoke about a spiralling effect. He was talking about labour costs. Is that still a concern, the higher labour costs?
Yes, definitely, that's a concern.
And government usually,
yes,
if
you look at the government settlements, they were relatively way higher than the normal inflation adjustments that everyone else uses. And I think one is really hoping that we don't get into an environment this year where people go out there and start saying, hey, but look at what food inflation is. You can't give us 6%. We need more than that. And if we do fall into that trap where we have to give into those demands, I think it will possibly put the work of the governor and probably the Minister of Finance, whom I'm expecting to be very prudent in his next budget speech, which is very important. It will put their work to detriment, really, if we actually continue to allow more aggressive wage settlements. So I'll say again that I believe the budget coming through next month is very important because it's going to address what Sizwe was just talking about, you know, the needs to address the fiscal side of our issues. Potentially, we could see a few more tax increases coming in, but we must see the government and the Ministry of Finance conceding to the fact that they cannot afford to continue to be expansionary in the economy, especially because we don't have resources. And no one actually, in my view, is going to be easily willing to give us some cash to loan us money, especially in the light of potentially pending downgrades because of the tough environment you have in the economy. So I do think that we need to contain all costs that the government has to bear as best as is possible. But
a response from either of you, workers are not going to accept below inflation increases. We haven't seen that. Is there a possibility of real social strife because of what's going on?
I think we're already in that environment. Firstly. Secondly, I think what shouldn't be neglected is that what matters ultimately is the total wage bill, in other words, compensation of employees. So you would have seen the government wage bill growing by 10% last year, and then an agreement that it's going to grow by inflation plus 2%, I think it was, over the next 2 years. In other words, this year and next year. What's not highlighted is the fact that if you look at the staff complement of the public sector, government actually contracted in terms of jobs last year. So now there are fewer people earning more overall. So the overall wage bill is actually moderating. And so this is the issue I sometimes have with the central bank's overemphasis on this wage spiral, because it also seems that both the private sector and the public sector seem to be managing the overall growth in the wage bill by quietly and softly exiting people.
But that
through
means
the
job losses, unemployed people paying more for food. So another form of social pressure.
Of course.
Let's come back and look at the rand again and your expectations for this entire year, I think, in terms of rate hikes. We're definitely looking at more. We take a short break. I'll be back with Sizwe and Owen.